He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. That's Isaiah chapter 53, verse 5. And it's the verse that Christians give to support the idea that Jesus was punished on the cross and murdered as a sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins. But today I'm going to tell you a different side of this story. A side that says Isaiah chapter 53 was never talking about Jesus, and it was never a messianic prophecy. If you're new to my content, this is the 6th video in a series I'm doing about the historical Jesus. This is Yeshua the Nazarene, episode 6. And in this video, I'm continuing a theme I've been talking about recently. And that theme is that I believe Jesus Christ did not come to this world to die for anyone's sins. Jesus Christ was a teacher and not a blood sacrifice. That's why today I want to talk about Isaiah chapter 53, because this is the one passage in the Old Testament that Christians today believe was about Jesus, and that it was prophesying about how Jesus would be tortured on the cross for the forgiveness of sins. But guess what? Isaiah 53 was never about Jesus. To understand why I say that, we need to go back in history to the time when Isaiah chapter 53 was written. Bible scholars tell us that this part of the book of Isaiah was written during a time when the nation of Israel had been attacked and conquered by Babylon. This happened in the year 586 BCE. BCE stands for before the Common Era, or before Christ. So the Babylonians invaded Israel and destroyed Jerusalem and the first temple. And after the siege, the Babylonians took a majority of the people of Israel into captivity back in Babylon. But here's the important part. They didn't take everyone. Some Israelites were left behind while others were taken as slaves to Babylon. And this is the real historical context of this part of the book of Isaiah. And Isaiah was not part of those people that had been taken. He was one of the ones that had remained at home. And when he's writing this chapter 53, he's actually talking about the people that are in captivity. What makes it even more interesting is that he uses the pronouns he or him to refer to those people. And he tries to bring out this idea that the people who are being tortured and killed as slaves out there in Babylon are paying for the sins of the ones who remained home. This was a common theme during those times, by the way. Like, if the Israelites lost a battle against an enemy, they would believe that God had allowed them to be defeated because they had sinned. And that's the exact thing we see happening here. So this author is essentially saying that Babylon invaded Israel because we've sinned, and the ones who've been taken into captivity are paying for those sins. So Isaiah chapter 53 was never talking about, it was never a future prophecy about Jesus. It was about what was happening at the time when it was written. And when you read it with this new understanding of the historical context, the whole meaning changes. I won't read the whole chapter, I'll just focus on the main verse that I mentioned earlier, verse 5. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. So remember what I said, the author uses the pronoun he to refer to the Israelites who are being tortured in Babylon as he's writing this. So when he says he was crushed for our iniquities, he's not talking about Jesus. He's talking about those people who are being crushed and tortured in Babylon for the sins of the ones who are at home, like himself. He was pierced for our transgressions. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. All of this is talking about what's happening in Israel when this book is being written. It's about the Babylonian captivity and not the future Messiah. And if you want, you can go read the entire chapter for yourself, and you realize that when you include the historical context, Isaiah chapter 53 starts to make a lot more sense. And by the way, someone in the comments of my previous video accused me of making these things up. But I'm not making anything up. This is the way that Jews view Isaiah chapter 53 and have always viewed it ever since it was written. And some people have argued that this passage cannot really be talking about the Israelites who are in captivity because it keeps saying he or him, and even another place says a man, and therefore it can only be talking about one person. But that's not the case. Like I mentioned, the author of this section of Isaiah personified the entire nation of Israel as one person. And that person is what is usually called the suffering servant. And the suffering servant was never supposed to be Jesus. The suffering servant was meant to mean the people of Israel as a whole. And the author of this book, in fact, tells us exactly who the suffering servant is, just a few chapters before 53. Isaiah chapter 49 verse 3 says, "He said to me, 'You are my servant Israel, in whom I will display my splendor.'" So you see, Isaiah chapter 53 was not a messianic prophecy, and it was not about Jesus. It was about the Babylonian captivity. It was talking about the suffering servant, and that suffering servant were the people of Israel who had been taken into slavery in Babylon. So the idea introduced in the book of Acts that this passage was talking about Jesus is, in my opinion, a misinterpretation of the original purpose and historical context of Isaiah chapter 53. And I'm not saying it's wrong to think that this passage was about Jesus. You can think that if you want, and it's actually the most agreed upon interpretation by Christians. But the prevailing view of historians, scholars, and Jews is that Isaiah 53 was talking about the Babylonian captivity. And the mere possibility that this was never a messianic prophecy means, to me especially, that Yeshua did not come to be tortured for the forgiveness of sins. This was an idea that was imposed upon him by the people who really believed in the temple sacrifice system. And as we covered in the first video of this theme, it's very likely that Yeshua himself never stood for the blood sacrifices. So again, Yeshua came to this world to be a teacher. He came to reveal a pure spirituality, a spirituality of nothing but love. Love God, love your neighbor. This was the crux of Jesus' entire spiritual teaching. It's only because of the blood sacrifice traditions that were happening at the temple in the first century in Jerusalem that people eventually came to believe that Jesus himself was supposed to be a sacrifice for the forgiveness of sin. And what did he teach us about forgiveness of sin? He said, if you want to be forgiven of your sin, forgive others first. For if you do not forgive those who sin against you, your Father in heaven cannot forgive you. The forgiveness that Yeshua taught had nothing to do with torture or suffering or blood or dying. These are human ideas that have been used to hide the pure spiritual teaching of Yeshua the Nazarene. And that pretty much concludes this theme. I'll be continuing a lot more episodes on this series about Yeshua the Nazarene. So if you like this kind of content, remember to give me a like and a follow. And I will see you in the next episode.